Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Angular Air. I'm Justin Schwarzenberger, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about AI for web devs, artificial intelligence for web devs. We got an awesome speaker here today. You can probably see him, but we'll let me introduce our other host, and then we'll get to our speaker and we'll get rolling. Mike's with us today. Mike, what's going on?
I'm coming with jokes today.
Ooh, sweet.
I'm feeling like my dev intelligence is artificial. So,
But not, I'm
a
trying to
little bit
unpack
of
that.
imposter syndrome.
All right, cool.
But happy to be here.
Nice. We got Jeff with us. What's going on, Jeff?
Yo, what's happening?
How's it going?
Going well. I am happy to be here as well. I won't have as many puns as Mike, but
right.
I will try to throw them in there if I can think of some good ones.
First call out. I'm digging the shirt.
Yeah, I like the shirt when they gave it to us, but it like faded super fast. But it's kind of cool now, I guess. Not quite the original color.
It's kind of like tie-dye. Now, is it like hypercolor, like back in the day, or like, as things get warm, it'll change color, or not that? It just faded.
No, it just faded.
Right.
Just old.
Wow.
Maybe we got to go back. Sometimes we got to go way back, for some of us. So for all of us, probably here on this one. Cool. Well, for everybody who's tuning in, Jeff, longtime friend of ours, also has historical with Angular Air. Used to caretake for it and host it and run it. So always good to have you back. Looking forward to learning from you as well.
Oh, thanks. I am happy to be back. Always happy to jump on with you guys. Besides Angular Air, we obviously know each other a lot from all the different conferences and other events we've gone to. So it's always fun seeing old friends. And in fact, it makes me miss, I will have to talk near the end about when is the next time we're all going to get together, because we definitely have to hang out again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Well, I guess we maybe we want to give a background for anybody who doesn't know about you, Jeff, and what you got going on and things like that. Plug anything, that sort of thing. Start with that.
Yeah, sure. So I am CTO and co-founder of a company called Get Human that helps people with customer service. I've been working there for over a decade now. It's been forever. But I've worked in the enterprise and done consulting and a bunch of other stuff along the way. And within the community, open source community, I have done a lot of stuff with the Angular community and other web development platforms. But I guess the biggest thing I've contributed, or most well known for, is I did a lot of the initial server rendering libraries for Angular when Angular 2 first came out. So there's a bunch of different smaller libraries kind of involved there. But Patrick Stapleton and I were two of the originals on that kind of server rendering effort for Angular back in the days when it didn't do that. And in the initial days of Angular 2, it didn't. It was only client side. And so it's very happy for me. I mean, this is like a digression and not the subject of what we're talking about today, but I am like super happy to see with Angular a lot of the more recent stuff they've been coming out with that has way far surpassed the stuff that Patrick and I were working on back in the day. I'm really happy with where Angular is at now and where it's going.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a hot topic right now, right? So it's kind of cool to see that. And I always remember that day when we first met. I think it was the Angular Connect conference, and you and Patrick were like, "Hey, we're down in the lobby hacking on this thing," and I'm like, "Oh, I want to come see." And that's kind of where we first got our connection. That was cool to see that stuff going on in early stages and stuff.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah, and actually, to segue, there is actually a connection. I was thinking that's like a digression, but now that I think about it, there is a little bit of a connection with what we're talking about today, because when we talk about AI for web devs, obviously there's like many different aspects of AI right now, and most of the time people are thinking about calling out to an API for some, either a prompt API, OpenAI or Gemini or whatever on the back end, or maybe using AI as an assistant for coding. There's different aspects of it or whatever, but that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about kind of building AI models into your web app itself, so that you are actually running the model within your web app in the browser. And the equivalent to server rendering is that back when Patrick and I were first working on it, server rendering was not super popular. It wasn't like the thing that web devs would think about or do. Everything was client side, right? And the overall JavaScript platform, we were well into the days where JavaScript was huge, and people were, not just Angular, React was starting around 2015, 2014, as well as other frameworks. And JavaScript was great, but server rendering was not. And that was like something that Patrick and I saw, like, oh no, this is something that's important. It's going to be huge. I see the same thing with this as well, that running AI within your web app is not something that most people, hardly anyone, does right now, but it is something that is going to be really big down the road, and something that a lot of web developers it's going to be like a critical skill for most web developers down the road.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how this fits in your mind, because when I think about AI, I think of two different things. One, I think about random or AI produced images that have really bad hands, and I also think about like coding assistants of, hey, let me go out and do some research for you and try and figure out what you're trying to code and help you with that. But it sounds like you're talking about something a little bit more embedded. So I'm interested to see your take on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you give some examples of what you mean by like what we use AI in our web app for?
Yeah, so the code example I'll go over later, the thing that is really helpful to use it for is transcriptions. So there's a couple different reasons. Like there's nothing that you would do it in the web because you can't do it in the back end. But the reason why you do it on the front end rather than the back end is for a couple different things. So for transcriptions, as an example, you can certainly stream audio to some backend service that does the transcriptions on the back end. But why would you want to do it on the front end? Why would you want to run your model that does the transcriptions on the front end? And one of the biggest things is cost. So transcriptions in particular can be super expensive if you're doing a lot of them. That's one thing that this was sort of the lead for me into this field, because Get Human has a web phone that we use where we do constant transcriptions. I mean, hundreds of thousands of hours, and we pay tens of thousands of dollars every month to one of these AI companies for transcriptions. And it's super helpful because audio to text is sort of the entry point then to a bunch of other AI services. Once you have text, then you can use a whole bunch of other LLMs and other things. So it is an important thing to have, depending on your app and whatever. But by running it in a kind of free open source model in the browser, it goes from tens of thousands of dollars to free, right? Now there's drawbacks and there's other things that we'll talk about and whatever else. But so cost is one of them. The other thing is related to scalability. So like obviously if you're running this on everybody's web browser as opposed to just like one big server on the back end, it can be more scalable. Now, if you're calling out to OpenAI or whatever, they handle all of that, so you don't have to worry about it. But there's a lot of people that are building and running their own backend models, and they have to deal with all of the different scaling concerns, and they are computationally intensive and whatever. So scaling helps. Offline capable. If that's like depends on what you want for your app, but you could, in theory, have a fully offline capable web app that is doing all the different. So you mentioned like of generating an image with like 6 hands. You can run an image diffusion model on the browser that doesn't have to connect to any backend to generate all the images of the 6 hands that you want. I don't know why you want to do that, but you could if you wanted to. Data privacy is the other thing. So like there's a concern for people who interacting with some of these models, because they're like, oh, am I going to submit my personal details and then it's on the cloud somewhere, and oh, God forbid if that model is then trained on my data that I give and then it shows up somewhere else. But if you have it all self-contained on the client side, then you don't have to worry about that. And then the last thing is so performance, but a particular type of performance, because downloading the models are huge, and that takes a long time. It's like 5 to 10 seconds for a lot of even if they're super optimized. But if you're on a device that has certain setup, which we'll go over that a little bit later, and it can run things in a pretty efficient way, the actual runtime of the model can usually be really quick, and then you don't have to worry about network latency and that type of thing. So for certain parts of it, it can be a performance add, not all of it.
Right. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but like high level. So are we talking about like when we talk about client side and running there, and even you talk about offline mode and stuff, but is that like we're leveraging something in the browser that has AI, and that's where the AI lives, and that's what
So this is where it dives into the reason why not a lot of people do it today. I mean, besides the fact that all this stuff is somewhat new, is that browser support is actually just starting to get there. Like there's a combination of low powered devices are probably always going to struggle to run even the most simple models. So like, okay, like if you're on some old Android device, like, we're not, you're probably
like
not your target audience. Yeah. But there's a whole bunch of standards that the browser, different browser groups are starting to work on to make it much, much easier. So like all these different acronyms, WebNN, WebGPU, WebGL, like all the different web blah, blah, blah. That, yeah. A lot of them are attacking different aspects of, there's other benefits rather than just AI running AI models. Like you could do other stuff, but all of that stuff helps is the priority of it within these standard, the browser standard groups has raised because of this need and desire to run these models.
So at a high level, without having to get into like specific details of what you need to do in order to run these LLMs in the browser, are you passing that all down to the browser to be able for it to run offline? Okay.
Yeah. So it's actually really similar to, in a different way, to the way that we handle client-side JavaScript and build. Like, so there's a build process for your model, and you can build it in different ways. So like it can be what's called quantized, that it can be like sort of packaged and optimized in a smaller unit, and you lose some precision or whatever, use some accuracy or it isn't perform as well in some cases, but it's more efficient and whatever. And part of the framework, whatever framework you're using, and I'll go over a couple different examples of different frameworks that are out there. It sort of handles pulling it down either from, in some cases, it's like the library that you're using has a well-known location of these pre-trained models. Like just as an example, so TensorFlow is one of the different libraries. You probably heard of TensorFlow as like kind of a back-end machine learning framework. So they have TensorFlow JS, which runs in the browser, and there are a small handful. It's like I think only like 14 pre-trained models specifically for TensorFlow JS to run in the browser. And if you use one of those, the API is like super simple. You don't have to like worry about like, oh, where's this coming from or whatever. You just kind of tell it which one to use, and then in the background it will pull it from some Google CDN that they have. But if you use some of the lower level APIs that are available, then there's all sorts of, if you want to get a little bit more detailed, you can host your own your models on your own CDN and kind of pull it down from there or whatever. So there's a lot of different options as far as that goes, but ultimately it's pulling down the model, and then it has to load it up and then run it for inference once you have your data.
Interesting.
So the scenarios you've used the models for is chat based or transcriptions?
Yeah. So I mentioned one example of transcriptions, but there's a lot. So image generation, a lot of different image related detection, like so detecting different things within images. Text to speech or speech to text, like both of those scenarios. And then when it comes to LLMs, like that's one thing you can't So there is a couple limitations, at least right now, because of the current capabilities, even in the best cases with browsers. And it's hard to do like a full LLM that you used to with like OpenAI running in the browser, because it's just like so huge. But you can do smaller parts of it. So like in OpenAI, for example, when you're doing it like as a developer, you might say like, so they break things down into like smaller tasks, like summarization is one. So summarization is give it a whole bunch of stuff and just like summarize this huge block of text. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you just do summarization by itself, that model is actually fairly small, and that you can run in the web just fine. And similarly, like different other things of text analysis. So like determining toxicity. I was trying to think of the word toxicity. Like, okay, how toxic is this? Any of that type of sentiment analysis type stuff is all bread and butter for having like a smaller, more specific model. And then you can do a writer or rewriter is another one. So like writing is like, write me an email that does X, Y, and Z or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? I think code is hard. I haven't seen like a code related, like analyze code model, but in theory, if I looked more, like you probably can have some code related models, like analyze this code, but it would have to be like more specific. Like it wouldn't be like a generalized, like do anything, like throw anything code. It would be like, okay, this model is more specifically geared towards, I don't know, just making sure that you follow these 1, 2, 3 best practices or something like that.
Interesting. I kind of think about some opportunities and things like, what if you do stuff where it's reading like the user's heat map for where their mouse is located at and what they're doing on your screen, and start having it like provide more information or reveal more stuff in your application. Say you got a commerce-based system and you're trying to help a sale along, and how can you learn from what the user's doing right now or what they're typing in, and then react on the fly to like showing other things or anything that can help,
definitely
that sort of thing. Like just start, capturing that and then feeding that. And then the interesting part I think about on that side is then there's that element of capturing it and saying, here's what I want you to do, a prompt or whatever. But then there's also like, well, what is it making its decision off of? Like, how are you training that, right? And how do you train it? Like, if you need to do something specific for your business, how do you train it for your business stuff, right? So like, if like the toxicity stuff that you're talking about, right? Like maybe you're building a website to review R-rated movies, and some toxicity, that level is fine, right? And so you're like, hey, I want it to be okay with some things, but not other things. Like, like how do you then also train those things? I guess that's the model that you're uploading, right, and using.
Yeah, and there is so when it comes to models, it's the easiest thing to do by far is look up on the web, like find a pre-trained model, and you just use that, and you're not trying to modify it at all. So that I mean, there's some the only thing I would say that's sometimes tricky with using the pre-trained models is in order to get data into the model, sometimes you have to do some prep work that like maybe like it needs the audio data in a certain format that you're not used to, that you have to like do some manipulation or whatever. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. The next level up harder thing is you take a pre-trained model, but you want to then make it more specific. You want to add some additional training to it or whatever. And then the most hard thing is from scratch, like trying to like build something. You have an objective in mind, and for sure, like right now, my own skill level is like, I'm just starting to like learn some of the more modern techniques for, adjusting some of the taking a pre-trained model and adjusting it. But for sure, like building from scratch, like I'm starting to learn some of the basics for like in TensorFlow and some of the other stuff. But as web developers, I would say the big thing to focus on initially is just using the existing pre-trained models. That's like much more in our wheelhouse without having to learn a whole bunch of new concepts.
Right. That makes sense.
So in the effort of, or in the area of Full disclosure, are you running any models against this show right now?
That would actually be. I should have thought of that. That would have been great, actually. But if you like, I have a kind of presentation to like gets in like some visualization of some of this, and then we could like maybe talk about some of the things in there, and then like I could show you some code if you guys are interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm curious about how you make this work, but then also things like if we're talking about browser capabilities and stuff like that, are we also talking about like if I'm in Chrome, it's Gemini, if I'm in Microsoft Edge, is it Copilot? Like, are you interacting with those things too, sort of thing?
Yeah. Actually, one thing I don't think I put this in the presentation, so I'll just mention it now. So like in theory, you could try to run any of these models and use these libraries in almost most modern browsers, but they're just going to run really slow unless you have a couple key things. So one is that it's WebGPU enabled. So WebGPU is one of the standards that allows a web process to use the graphics processor on your device. So and again, it's not a requirement, but it definitely helps it so that it runs a fairly good speed.
Except on my flip phone that Justin says I use.
I got an old one too. It's just different OS, but
Yeah, I wouldn't run these models on your flip phone. No, definitely. WebAssembly is another one. So So the models could, in theory, be built without WebAssembly, but it's like it's similar to JavaScript when you're doing a JavaScript optimization where it kind of like reduces it down in size. The most efficient models will run with WebAssembly, and so like again, just one other thing that you really do need to make sure is capable. Another thing, so if you're just calling out to a model like one time, you don't need this, but for something streaming, like anything with audio related or anything where you're kind of continuously processing, you probably want to use a web worker, which has been around for a while, but not all browsers are web worker capable or whatever. But it's one of those things that helps, like if you're doing anything streaming related. And then the last thing is just memory. So like you really, I guess the standard that I've been using, at least in my production app, where I will check for these different capabilities to see whether I even attempt to try to run the model in somebody's browser, is at least 2 gigs of available memory. And all that stuff it's easy in JavaScript to check all of those things. And so if you check those 4 things, then you probably have a decent chance of being able to run the model just fine.
Right.
So yeah,
so we want to use like progressive enhancement then. So if you don't have that, then we're going to fall back to,
you can just call out to the back end, or I mean, depending on what you're trying to do. But so there's things you could do as a fallback for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, you want to share? Allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, okay.
While we're doing that, not gonna lie, like as an avid gamer, I kind of get disturbed a little bit about like, hey, don't be using my GPU for your AI stuff. Like that's for my games. Like,
oh, yeah. So, well, in theory, if it's running for through a web worker, I guess it still would compete at the GPU level. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you're trying to game while you're going through the web, I suppose that would be an issue.
But if you're taking a break from your game to go do something on the web, then that's on you.
Mike, you never take breaks from your games. Come on now. We know that.
Then there's no competing issues.
That's true. What if I left my browser open because I was looking up some research for the game, and then all of a sudden it just starts using my GPU? I get raw. Get my on. No,
okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is just like I wanted to have like one of the typical setup that I use for my web apps. So forget about AI and machine learning for a second. This is just like, you have your client-side Angular app running in a browser. You might connect to some stuff on the edge, like I use Cloudflare a lot, but I mean, you can use something else. And you usually have some sort of cloud provider, either Google Cloud or AWS. And then you might call it to some third-party services. So like this is like pretty standard. And when it comes to using AI, at least right now, most people will do this. They'll have their web app calling out to APIs at some level. So either their own, a third-party API like OpenAI, or if you're running a model in Google Cloud or some other cloud provider, or even Cloudflare has a whole bunch of models you can run in at the edge itself. Mm-hmm. And so those are all API calls. So like that's not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about actually in the browser itself. And there's sort of two flavors of this. One is, so I actually didn't check whether other browsers have something similar. I should look into that. But Chrome has this experimental API for built-in AI. So these are models that Google has built that I'll show in a second, that are built into the Chrome browser behind an experimental flag that you can utilize. And eventually, in theory, will be available in all Chrome once it's out of experimental phase. So there's that. And then sort of the other flavor is using one of these different open source libraries. So the two most popular ones are TensorFlow JS from Google, or Transformers JS from this organization called Hugging Face, which I always laugh when I say the name Hugging Face and see the logo. It's very, very funny to me. So we talked about the advantages, but just to be clear about the disadvantages, I mean, we talked about device support. I mean, that's obviously a challenge. I sort of indirectly mentioned generalization. So like I mentioned how really when you need to have more specific models in the browser. There's a whole bunch of generalized models, like the one that you use when you interface with OpenAI chat manually as a user. And those are generalized models. Those models are massive and could never run in a browser. You need like something more specific. And then initial load performance. Yeah, I mean, the models, even though they're smaller than the generalized models, they're still pretty big and usually takes like 5 to 10 seconds to download initially. But then you could cache them and whatever else. And then I talked about the advantages. So when you talk about the architecture, I'm not going to go over all this, but I just wanted to have a slide pointing out sort of how the AI related infrastructure within a browser is actually pretty involved in getting more and more. There's more stuff that they're adding over time to enable this to get faster at all levels. So, at the hardware level, there's stuff, I mean, things I hadn't heard of before until I started looking into this, for certain things that they're building into some of the new laptops, even for like, the new MacBook Pro and other things that will make it better at the hardware level, stuff at the operating system level, within the browser itself with a lot of these standards. And then once you get to this purple layer, that's where you get into some of the open source libraries. But within the open source libraries, there's sort of two layers. There's the runtime, which is you usually don't interact with directly. It's just kind of like something at a lower level API that's running. And then there's the higher level API. And so most of the time, as web developers, we're interacting with these higher level APIs. And then, like I mentioned, it's so much easier when you just use one of the pre-trained models. So before I go any further, like we talked about some of this earlier, but like, does this all make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So essentially, like, our web app is either pulling these things down or getting them ready, rather using the Chrome built-in API or pulling down TensorFlow or Hugging Face as a dependency. We got it in there, we get our models, and now from there, we can do everything client side to interact with the things, right?
That's right. Yep.
And I kind of keep going back to the you mentioned briefly the offline mode, and if you're actually going to things to consider, but it's a good kind of measuring stick of going, okay, if I'm thinking in offline mode, then I kind of now get a better picture for myself of what we're talking about in the client side browser, right? And that I say I take my network connection off, and now that's how I like flatline think about these things. Okay, so got it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
I do have a question. So a lot of OSs now, when I say a lot, I mean two specifically, Windows and Mac OS both ship with some sort of machine learning, whether it be Siri or it be Copilot on Windows. Have there been any like gateways, APIs opened up to be able to talk to them, to be able to get access to a larger model from within the browser? I know you mentioned on the OS level, I saw like Windows ML or something like that on a previous slide. So I wasn't sure if there was any access to like native OS models through the browser.
So that's interesting. I haven't seen that yet. But if I had to bet, I would imagine they eventually would do something like that. That sounds like it would make a lot of sense. But no, I have not seen anything like that yet.
Okay. I'm just looking at the Copilot icon at the bottom of my screen. So
yeah. No, it's a good question for sure. All right, so let's actually talk about some of these, get into some of these. All right. So for like the Chrome built-in AI. So again, experimental. It's not available right now. Actually, I'm gonna change to a different screen. Present. Share. I'm just gonna. Oh, you know what? Going to make it easier. I'm just going to share my entire screen. Yeah, so I could switch between. Okay, not this. This. Let's bump it up. So you guys can see this. I'm on the flat Chrome flags screen.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know how much you guys have ever looked at this, but within your Chrome browser, if you type in to the address Chrome://flags. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in here, but one of the things is all the experimental stuff. And so when it comes to the built-in AI stuff, there's a bunch of them, like the prompt API, summarization API, you can see here. So basically, if you want to use any of these now to try it out, you just enable it and then restart the browser. And then it's as simple as, sorry, let me get it set up here. Oh, actually, I don't think, does this allow you to see my dev tools?
Yes.
It does. Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay. And I'll bump this up. So with the APIs are all pretty much the same for the different Chrome built-in AI ones. And so this one is language detector AI model where you give it some text and it'll tell you what language it is, whether it's English or Spanish or whatever. And so after you enable the flag, you can just check to see if it's enabled or not. And so this says that it's ready. And then, oops.
The slow part.
Yeah. And so then this part is where you're creating an instance of the detector. And if you have not downloaded the model yet, this is what takes a long time. So I've already done it, so it's already in cache. But for your first time, this is going to take like 5 seconds or so. And then the last thing, once you've created it, is actually trying to use it. And trying to use it is fast. So if I type, hi, my name is Mike. So it returns back just all the different languages it could be with confidence scores. And so this is 99% sure it's English, basically. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it. So what we're doing is we're trying to feed it some text and get it to tell us what language that text is in.
Yep.
Got it.
And so there's a limited number of pre-trained models that are available this way. And so translator, so translating from one language to another. The language detector I just showed you. Summarizer, again, taking a block of text and then just summarizing it into one or two sentence summary. A writer to just write from scratch. Rewriter, give it something in like write this better or whatever. And then the prompt API, actually, I gotta look back there's a chat group for a lot of people using these APIs. And I think that they don't have this available within the website, and it's just in Chrome extensions right now because this is like a bigger model. This is like the prompt API is more like the LLM that you might interact with from OpenAI or whatever. But I think eventually they'll have something that'll be available on the web as well. So that is basically it for Chrome. So does that make sense for the Chrome built-in AI ones?
Yeah.
And the API is super simple. Like, so you as a web developer should be able to use these like really easily. You don't have to manage anything. You don't have to worry about any of the overhead. Like Google does a lot of the stuff behind the scenes, and the browser has the capability kind of built into it. Other than downloading the model itself, that's like the one thing you have to kind of account for. And then for TensorFlow, well, you probably won't see all these, but there's a bunch of different pre-trained models. I have some code for this that is pretty simple. So there are definitely much more complicated implementations of using TensorFlow JS, but this is like a super simple. It's only a couple lines of code, so that's why I kind of want to show it here. So it's just using the TensorFlow API, the library. So it's a speech commands one, and then similar to the Chrome built-in AI API. Once you call create, behind the scenes, it's downloading the model. So just like with that, this create takes a little while. And actually, oh, geez, I should have put in a wait there. And then, ensuring that it's loaded. That's fine. And then basically it works. So you can, for this, what this is doing is this is listening to audio down here where we listen. It will get your microphone, and the API does everything behind the scenes. So like that's why this is one of the easier APIs, because it like does everything for you. So it'll grab your microphone, ask the user for permission if it needs to. And then as it gets audio, so like this result is like a snippet of audio, it puts it through the model and it sees whether it recognizes any of a set number of commands. So like there's, this is used for, you give it like, okay, try to recognize in somebody's speech, whenever they say the word left or right or whatever, then make sure you notify, detect that. And in theory, like in your web app, the reason why you would use that is maybe you're having the user give voice directions to the mouse moving over the screen or something like that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is pretty much it for TensorFlow. And then actually, before I go to Transformers JS, for TensorFlow, does that make sense for the API?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we had a question about like if we're doing our app as a PWA, like to do the models, like where you said the call for the models and it pulls the models, like how do we get that? If we were to orchestrate that with the PWA where you wanted to have like offline mode or something.
You're saying how you would do that?
Is it just basically like, hey, here's the method right there you showed that does the model pull. So now you just have to orchestrate when you do that if you want to do it as part of a PWA and offline mode.
Yeah, I don't think it would change for like you would have to be online in order to like pull down the model initially.
Right.
That's true. But then you could go offline after that.
But what is it? It's been a while since I've worked on PWAs. There's a manifest, I believe, of different files that you want to cache locally or save as part of the PWA. Do you need to have the model as part of that manifest?
Yeah. I don't think you do. I think that's only if you want to make sure that it's cached as part of the PWA stuff. Like because you at the very first time you're gonna have to pull it down anyways from the network. But for the subsequent times, most of the time when you're caching the model, it doesn't use the PWA type caching. Even if you're running a PWA, it uses the underneath the scenes the cache API of the browser. Because it has to like it's not just like a static file. I guess that's the difference, is that the model is not like a static file. When it loads it, at least it saves it as like a blob object.
Cool.
All right. So Transformers is the other one. So this example at least is a little bit more complex. And so there is a higher level API for Transformers that is actually really simple. But this one is, for whatever reason, I decided to do a more complicated one. I guess just to demonstrate something that involves a little bit more. So in this case, I'm streaming audio to my model and I'm trying to do transcriptions in the browser. And by the way, these are on my GitHub. They're publicly available. I'll send you guys the link afterwards. But the short of it for this is that in this Angular app, like when you create this button, press this button, it will create a web worker that has basically all of the Transformers JS code in it. And the idea with this is that we're streaming audio to this model. And so there's actually, this isn't part of the AI part of stuff, but for the streaming part of stuff, there is this part to capture the audio, which I won't go through the details of this, but the short of it is that it gets access to the user's microphone, and then it basically takes the audio stream and it has to like convert it to a particular format that the model can read. So like that's where, like I said, the complications happen sometimes when you have to put it into a format, certain format. And if you guys are interested, you can like look in this code to see how that conversion happens. But regardless, it will send it here, where this is going from that place where it's capturing the audio, and then it's sending it to the worker. So this is the actual code that kind of links up those two pieces and streams the audio to the worker that's running the model. And so let's look at that that web worker that's running the model. And so you can see even from the stuff I'm importing that there are a couple within the Hugging Face Transformers JS library, a little bit lower level objects that are involved for like a tokenizer and processor that I'll talk about. But basically, let's go down to where it's actually processing the audio. Actually, sorry. First, when it starts out, the web worker, it has to actually create the model, and so it creates not just the model, but these are two other pieces that aren't as big or whatever as the model gets downloaded, but these help. So the processor, it's a preprocessor. It takes audio from one format and puts it in a different one for that the model it requires, and then the tokenizer at the end. The model will output not actual words, even though I'm trying to do speech recognition. Like it should take audio and then output English, like English words. But the initial output of the model is not English. It's just these more tokens that are more abstract, are not language specific. and then you need a tokenizer in order to that is like English specific to say like, okay, output this in English. All right, and so going down to this is where the actual the key part of where it's using the model to do all of that. And so it's taking a chunk of audio, and then actually, this is even the process audio ones has the meat of it. So like I mentioned, there's a preprocessor really. And so this is the thing that's just changing it to a certain format that the model's used to. And then the model actually runs. So this is the part, this line of code is the data is in the right format now, and it's actually running it through the model and outputting those tokens. And then you turn those tokens into actual English text, and then you can output the text.
That's cool.
Sorry. Stop. Yeah, so I didn't want to bog down in too many of the details, but hopefully that gives you kind of a sense of some of the libraries involved in some of the different ways you can do this with TensorFlow and transformers.
How did you find the documentation as you were going through and trying
terrible.
to
Absolutely terrible. Oh my God. Horror. That's one reason or indication that things are not very well formed yet, and there's not a lot of people using this yet. So for TensorFlow JS, it was better because for their pre-trained models, they're pretty baked. But for for Hugging Face, no, like especially as like a little side digression, but also AI related. So like I do use AI as a developer to just like, okay, can you give me an example of code that does X, Y, or Z? So if you try to do that for this, if you're like, oh, create me a Hugging Face Transformers JS example of using this model, okay, it will 100% do the wrong thing. Like, because it's, again, an indication that just there's not enough good examples out there now, and it's just not used well enough. So it's early days. Like, it is early days for using this stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's what I'm saying. Like, this is, as a web developer, it's not like, oh, tomorrow I'm going to put this into production for my stuff. I mean, maybe for really adventurous, but it's more like, hey, this is going to be big. Like they're getting the pieces in place now at the browser level, at the device level, to be able to support this type of thing. And there are a number of use cases where it makes a lot of sense to do this. And so in the near future, not too far away, this is going to be something that you're going to want to start to incorporate. So just get it on your own radar as a web developer, and start to kind of like listen to content, look for examples, think about it, that type of thing.
Nice. Contribute to docs. Does the TensorFlow Hugging Face, they have costs involved with those?
No, nope. It's all free. In fact, Hugging Face is sort of like, the way to think about it is that it is sort of like the GitHub of like GitHub open source code is on GitHub. Open source models are on Hugging Face. It's a very similar thing.
Interesting.
So it's all people that are just doing research stuff in their own time and whatever. And they're not, I mean, that's why the documentation is not great, and they don't always work perfect or whatever. But I mean, there are, for the common use cases, okay, like speech recognition, text to speech, image generation, like image detection, all that type of stuff. Those are like very common use cases. There's a ton of people building these publicly available open source models that are pretty good.
Is there TypeScript type definitions that you could help to infer some of the usage? I mean, there may not be like
sometimes
like actual docs, But sometimes it'll help you to infer and to make the API a little bit more discoverable.
For sure, TensorFlow JS has a great type definition. So like that is no problem. Like that's great. For open source, for Hugging Face, it's hit or miss, depending on what you're doing. For sure.
So we like one PR merge away from somebody making this AI that's open source available go nuts on us, or what?
Maybe, I don't know.
Like, get this model from here, and everybody can contribute to it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier the concern about some rogue AIs running in your browser and eating up all your processing. I mean, that is a legit concern, really. Like it, but I would say it's the same thing. If somebody writes a really bad web app, you could do the same thing. You could pin somebody's CPU. And we used to, back in the day, that was like a common thing that happened. But then the frameworks sort of evolved and got better at kind of managing that. And I think the same thing is going to eventually happen, where the sort of frameworks that people are creating will protect you against doing something stupid like that.
Right. Until AI finds a way to override that, and then we're out of control, right?
Exactly.
But for the meantime, let's make our lives better. So. That's cool. That's very cool. Yeah, I like what you said in terms of like, just getting ahead of getting exposed to it, as a web developer, seeing it, start playing with it, just get it on your radar, right? Because it's coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, you'll be tasked with a project where you're going to need to integrate it and use it. And so anything you should get more exposed to it and start seeing it, then it's not just such of a surprise and have to deal with it, Actually,
one thing that I haven't done yet, but I have sort of had in the back of my mind that would help people, I think, help web developers in particular, is that, a lot of times it helps to go from the top down for this, that like you're trying to achieve a certain objective. So like, I feel like I could create a pretty good framework or mental framework, that is, for, okay, you're trying to achieve this. This is how, like, and it's hard, maybe something you could potentially achieve without AI, but like this is where it fits into these, 10 top AI related categories. And if you're interested in this is how you find like a model that would work for your use case. And then like, this is how you, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think from the top down, it may make a lot more sense, more than just abstractly like, oh, I may need this particular capability at some point in the future. You know what I mean? It should be focused on the product you're building and like trying to achieve a certain user experience or an actual end goal for the product that you manage.
Yeah, it's like there's an app for that, but now it's gonna be there's a model for that, right? You go to the model store and find your model.
Exactly.
Yeah. Definitely an interesting future that we're approaching rapidly. So very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we can put a bow on it, wrap this thing up. Any last final thoughts on that, or we want to do some picks? Anybody have any picks, or how we want to close?
You have any picks, Mike?
I've got a new season of Reacher just came out. At least the intro.
I love Reacher.
4 episodes are out. Very, very cool. I enjoy that show. I really should get started on reading some of the books.
Since you plugged that, I will plug. I love Severance. It is like gone to be my top favorite show now. Can't recommend highly enough.
I've heard good things. I don't have the Apple subscriptions.
So without spoiling anything, give me the premise of it. Because I mean, I've had a Severance package, so I understand that. I mean, what is the show about? Like high level?
No, it's a cool. I mean, even without the show itself is done really well, but even the concept is cool. Even if you don't see the show, like that, they have a technology that severs your brain into two halves, like your mentality, so that you have a work self and then a home self, and they don't know anything about each other. They're two separate people, even in the same body. And the people that are severed, they literally, once they go into the elevator to work, then they switch over to their work self, and the work self doesn't know. They're never outside of the office. They are just there to work. And the work, the outside self has no idea what happens in the office. And there's a bunch of layers to it of like, what the company is actually trying to do with them, why they're having severed workers and what they're working on and whatever. But just like that concept, like I love it. And it's a whole bunch of interesting questions about like, even though it's the same body, like, are those two separate people or is it the same person? I don't know.
Wow. I'm intrigued now. Now I'm going to watch it. I didn't watch it because I'm like, you're not telling me what it's about. I don't understand. So now,
is everybody severed or no?
Not everybody, no. And that's part of the thing. Like there's a group on the outside that thinks it's torturing people and they're against it. But it's just this one company that does it. And within the company, there's some people who are not severed. So it's only like one group of people within the company that are severed working on this one specific thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sounds cool.
No spoilers.
Cool. No spoilers.
How about you, Justin? Do you have any picks?
I mean, if we're on shows, we started watching The Day of the Jackal. Got a couple of episodes in.
I like I like that one too. Great. Yeah.
So that one seems pretty cool. So checking that one out. I dove into Avowed, that game. Give it a few hours so far. Might see it through further, but been playing a bunch of Valheim lately. Back into that, so it's got all my time and all my CPU. So don't be using my Valheim CPU when I'm trying to build stuff for some AI model stuff. So yeah, that's it.
Cool.
All right, Jeff. Thanks again for joining us. Coming back. Always love having you here. Always love learning from you. Got so much insight to share with us. So please come back anytime. You're always welcome. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. See you, everyone.